Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin says accusations of interference in the U.S. election is just an attempt to discredit President Donald Trump. Now, Putin was speaking at his annual end-of-the-year press conference, which is still underway. He also said he wants to work with Washington to help resolve the ongoing nuclear crisis in North Korea. He's touched on domestic issues as well, including his bid for re-election and the economy. Well, joining me now in the studio is TRT World Defense analyst Oubai Shahbandar for some comment on Putin's press conference. Let's first talk about that re-election bid. He seemed to really seize an opportunity to say it's the opposition's fault for not posing a legitimate challenge to his party. Let's listen to exactly what he had to say.
No competition from the opposition, you say. You know it's not my duty to bring out my own competition. But I keep thinking that our political environment, as well as the economic environment, should be competitive. And I would really very much like it. And I will do my best so our political system will be well balanced, which is impossible without competition in politics.
What does he mean there? I mean, he says he wants the competition, but there are more than a few accusations of him actually going to the limits to suppress opposition.
Well, that's why it was so interesting to hear President Vladimir Putin say that he supports competition in the Russian political system. As we all know, he's just recently announced his bid for re-election, which is coming up for president, which is coming up in March of next year. Of course, President Putin has been president since the year 2000. He's been in power for a long time. But as we heard him say that in order for him to run, there really needs to be a legitimate opposition. He says he supports it, but he says that the opposition in Russia should not focus on holding rallies, but they should focus on having an agenda that suits the needs of the Russian people, primarily the economy and services. So it's clear that President Putin does not believe that there is a viable opposition or a strong opposition in Russia today. Of course, if you speak to the opposition, they will tell you in Russia that they're being jailed, they're being prevented from holding meetings. And in fact, the main opposition that's led by Alexei Navalny just released a very detailed economic plan just earlier today. And of course, as we know, Navalny has been banned by the Russian government from running for president in 2018. So while Mr. Putin here is saying that there is no viable opposition, it's clear that some of these opposition leaders would respectfully disagree.
Now, there's also, from what we're hearing, a record number of accredited journalists actually attending this press conference. I think over 1,600 maybe. There are many of them foreign journalists and a number of them Americans as well that very much wanted to ask about the accusations of Russian interference in the U.S. election. And he said some interesting things. He said Russia and the U.S. should not be fighting like animals. And then he went on to really criticize a lack of respect for Trump and the people who voted for him.
Absolutely. Over 1,600 journalists, which makes this yearly event, so fascinating to watch, and even more fascinating that Mr. Putin directly called upon international journalists, American journalists from ABC News, Associated Press, and others. So it's clear that President Putin was trying to show that, hey, he's open for transparency. He's taking questions from the American press and from the international press. And of course, the questions right off the bat were regarding the Russian government's relationship with President Trump of the United States. President Putin was asked a very difficult question early on what he makes of all these accusations that the Trump campaign, when President Trump was running for office, had so much alleged connections and communications with members of President Putin's government, which of course President Putin dismissed as being a myth and as being part of a campaign by the opposition in the United States to discredit the attempts by President Trump to build a constructive relationship between the United States and Russia to focus on counterterrorism and counterproliferation, amongst other issues. So it was very clear from his answer that President Putin believed that while Trump wants to build a constructive relationship with Moscow, he is perhaps being prevented from doing so by members in Congress and even perhaps by members of the American media. We saw some positive language here, some fake news, as President Trump would say it. And it was interesting to see some of the positive language that the President Putin was using towards Trump when he was asked about his first year in office. It seems that the American economy is doing very well. Markets are strong. There's investor confidence. These are all factors that President Putin raised regarding President Trump's accomplishments in the first year. It seems that Putin wants to work constructively with Trump. We'll see whether or not he is able to do so on both sides.
We'll see how this all plays out in the United States. Okay, Oubai, we'll leave it there for now. Thanks so much for coming in.